you hear a lot about you can oftentimes hear about the problems, what's not working, what's going, what's not. This is more about what you can do, some ideas that you can have so that you can have a volunteer program where you can utilize the tools that I'm going to be presenting to you. Now, one thing is that I will have templates available. So for those of you who are interested in some of the documents, graphics, etc., that I'm going to be showing to you, you're more than welcome to ask me after the webinar, and I'll be more than happy to supply that information to you. The webinar is really based on my experiences, and I've had quite a number of years working with volunteers. If you run a volunteer program at an agency, you're most likely doing many of the things that I'm going to be presenting today. Though I'm hoping that you'll get some new ideas, and like I said, I got those templates I'll be happy to share with you. If you're not currently operating, or actually like a volunteer coordinator or director, working directly with the volunteers in that capacity, this is still going to be information that I think will hopefully you'll benefit from, because I assume you have, or you will soon have, volunteers in your organization. Okay, let's see if I can get this to go to the next screen. Just a second, please. There we go. That's me. And below it you see some graphics. These are some places that I've worked before with volunteers. Several years ago, I ran the national and then state runaway and youth hotlines. And those hotlines, for those of you who aren't familiar with them, located here in Austin, and with the hotlines were with the governor's office, but then switched over to the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services, the same agency that houses Child Protective Services, Adult Protective Services, foster care, licensing, etc. When I was at the hotline, we had about 100 volunteers that would come in throughout the month and would help answer the hotline and do a lot of other things, but primarily answering the hotlines. We didn't have a really big staff, so we really depended on those volunteers to come in, and so we had a great group of people that would do that. Later on, I stayed with the agency, went into Child Protective Services, and worked in administration there, here in the Austin office. And we didn't work with a whole lot of volunteers, although we did have volunteers working. We have, I don't know if you've ever heard of the rainbow rooms that are around the state with in different locations with Child Protective Services. But basically, they're these rooms, large rooms, oftentimes smaller rooms in some cities, that have items, clothing, and infant formula, and etc., for children that are removed from the home and are in CPS care. And volunteers help in the rainbow rooms to organize and to also to get out there and help with the donations and all. And then now I am Director of Support Services and Community Partnerships at the Hope Alliance Crisis Center in Round Rock, Texas, just outside of Austin. And I've got about 50 volunteers that come in throughout the month, or also some that help out periodically with different events when needed. And that's really probably about takes up about a third of my time here. I also manage support services. We support the advocates, counselors, and the management, and of course the volunteers also fit into that area as well. And then we have our primary prevention, which I assume several of you listening have the primary prevention programs at your locations. So we have our specialists that go out to the schools here in Williamson County and present on violence prevention. So those are the areas that I cover here. And really, volunteers can help out and do help out in most of the areas here, and I'll talk about that more in a minute. I first started in social services as a volunteer years ago at MHMR, which they're now called the local mental health authorities, and eventually ended up supervising there and moving forward. So enough about me and my experience. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit. This is a little conceptual information here. I'm going to show this to you. It's the 8-step volunteer management cycle. We have needs assessment, position design, recruitment, screening, orientation and training, supervision and feedback, recognition, and retention. You may have heard about this model before. I think it's pretty accurate, to be honest with you, based on my experiences working with volunteers. What we're going to focus on today, though, is going to be pretty much the recruitment and retention piece of the cycle. I do other presentations on the other pieces of the steps in the cycle, but we're going to be focusing on just a few of them today. And I put this together based on the cycle because really each of the steps really are not mutually exclusive. Because needs assessment, you have to consider the position to design when you're looking at, when you're assessing the needs in your organizations. How are you going to use the volunteers? What's the need? And then position design and recruitment. Well, you have to figure out who are you going to be recruiting. You have to know what the needs are and what volunteers, what kind of skills are these volunteers going to need? What's the population? Are they going to be young people? Are they going to only be adults over the age of 18? Are you going to reach out to volunteer groups, say at a business like Dell or some other organization that may want to help out? And then there's the screening process, which of course is very important. And the screening process just really isn't when you receive that application. The screening starts at the first contact from the volunteer, whether it's in person at a volunteer fair, if it's at a volunteer orientation or in your organization. And it really is kind of ongoing during the first phases of the process, which include orientation and training. Because in the orientation, you're still learning about that person. Are they going to be a good fit for the organization? Is the organization going to be a good fit for this volunteer? It's a two-way street. And then the training, that's still part of the screening process. The training, when they're in those training classes, we have a 32-hour training class. And that's a really great opportunity for not only the volunteers to learn about us, whether we're going to be a place where they want to volunteer, but is this going to be a good fit for our organization? And so pretty much that screening process is going on until they actually finish the training, the on-the-job training, and start to volunteer in that capacity. Okay, and then there's the supervision, and that, during the training, obviously you're supervising in a training class and you're providing feedback. Also, there's the recognition. You're providing, whether it's verbal recognition or other types of recognition during the trainings. And you're also considering the retention, because you certainly don't want to lose any of those attendees that are in the classroom. Okay, now let's go ahead and focus on here on the needs assessment. We have accessing the current organizational needs, incorporating the agency's mission statement into the needs assessment, considering the benefits and challenges that are going to be involved with having volunteers in your organization or increasing the numbers of volunteers. Soliciting input from staff, volunteers, and board members in the needs assessment, and also periodically reassessing your agency's needs to find, well, do you really need volunteers in this particular area? or do you need more in another area? And so it's kind of a fluid, it can be a fluid type of a situation. So let's talk about the organizational needs. Most, if not all, nonprofit or social service agencies obviously utilize volunteers in some capacity, most do. And so the question is, what are your organization's needs? Do you need more volunteers? Do you need a more diverse volunteer group? And this could be involving skills, certain skills that your organization needs. It could also be trying to get a more culturally diverse group of volunteers in, which is very important. Okay, then there's the mission statement, and I think that really depends on, you have to really, when you're looking at recruiting volunteers, what the volunteer positions really want to be tied to your mission statement. And an example might be, is your organization providing trauma-informed care? And this might be something to incorporate while you, not only throughout your program and your agency, but also in this step as well. And then we have benefits and challenges to your organization. Is your organization prepared to accept and operate a comprehensive volunteer program? Are you ready to? Are your staff prepared to welcome volunteers in? And do they feel that they have the time, the energy, and the resources to stay on top of things in terms of the volunteer program? And some benefits, obviously, that you would want to consider would be helping with the workload. That's really a major one right there. Then that can be the areas of client services, administration, community collaboration, fundraising, grants, etc. And that goes back to whether it's a skills-based volunteer or a, I suppose any volunteer, there's a certain skills base, but when we're talking about skills-based in this context, we're really talking about, does somebody have skills like with media, let's say, or graphic design, or legal services, if someone's been an attorney or worked in a legal office, etc. Okay, so position design. We want to match the volunteer expectations to the organizational goals. Consider skill-based volunteers again. Create detailed job descriptions. Consider short and long-term volunteer opportunities. And develop a volunteer policy manual. The matching volunteer expectations to organizational needs, we want to consider how the needed position will meet a volunteer's expectations in terms of the realistic scope of the duties that you're going to want the volunteers to be involved with. Does it make sense to have a volunteer in a particular position? And that's something that you're going to want to decide with the rest of your staff and the board and all. Is it going to be a job where we can, that just makes sense, whether it's a short-term or a long-term position? And I mentioned the skills space before, and those can be for, you know, board members, board subcommittee members, again, media graphics, or organizational assessments, etc. And then we want to create a detailed job description. And just like you would develop a description with employees, you also want to have a detailed job description for each volunteer position. So not only do we have expectations that are given to the volunteer, but we also know that for ourselves and for our staff, that these are the expectations that we're going to have, that everybody has to understand. And you want to solicit input from staff, volunteers, and board members on how to enhance the agency's efforts. And staff buy-in is so important. You really are going to want to get staff buy-in because without staff buy-in and that energy is not there, it's a great way to lose volunteers. If someone comes into a shift and they have to sit there and wait for 15 minutes because staff haven't prepared anything for the volunteer to do, then that could be a real problem. Volunteers will, and they say, I've talked with them many times, they'll say, well, why do you need me if you don't have something for me to do? And I know that oftentimes here at our main office, we have volunteers that come in throughout the week to volunteer and help us out. And we always like to have people on regular schedules, and I'll talk more about that in a few minutes, so that there's consistency, and we also can have things ready for them. And so they're not just sitting around, we're running around looking for something for them to do. There may be a little bit about that, like we already know there's something, we just got to go ask somebody. But we don't want them just sitting around waiting, and that's just not a good thing.
Jay, I have a question.
Sure.
Okay, when you get the buy-in from the staff and you write up the essential functions, who's actually putting this together? Is this the HR puts it together, or do you pull out, let's say, do you have an essential function for an advocate shelter that you would hire and you add stuff to this or take out? I mean, that's kind of what I was thinking.
Yeah. That's a great question. Actually, we incorporate input from a variety of places and people, whether it's shelters, the shelter staff, or my unit, and also HR definitely is involved. A lot of times the templates are fairly easy to come up with because you already have templates for employees, right? And so you're pretty much just modifying those to fit, a volunteer position. But yeah, so it's not just one person; it's input from a variety of sources, and it is updated periodically. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Just curious.
Sure. And let's see, where was I going next with this? Okay, so. And again, you want to periodically assess to make sure, because your program, your agency could be expanding, and that could be a really good thing. Of course, on the other hand, it could be, God forbid, there's cutbacks, funding cuts, and all that. You have to modify things accordingly. So, okay, and then position design along those lines with the job descriptions, the detailed descriptions. We want to match the expectations to organizational needs. The skills-based volunteers, considering that, want to create the detailed job descriptions, consider short and long-term volunteer opportunities. Short-term could be a one-time project, of course, and then long-term, which we really like that, of course, because then you get some great volunteers that stay around. I've had volunteers that have stayed around for 5, 10 years in some cases, and some really good people doing a really great job. They're obviously very committed, and other volunteers don't stay so long. That's okay too. And you definitely want to develop that volunteer policy manual, just like your agency should have an employee managed volunteer policy manual, and it should be very similar to the employee manual, just kind of like those job descriptions, but there are definite differences, of course. But you touch on many of the same areas, and I'll get into that in a minute. Okay. So the board-approved volunteer policy manual. Let's see here. Okay, so we want to have in the manual the mission, philosophy, services, confidentiality, safety, policies and procedures. We want volunteer screening, training, placement process, supervision, conflict of interest, workplace behavior, obviously non-violent behavior, not using substances, illegal substances during volunteer hours, and when representing the agency. That's very important out in the community. Safety concerns and security, and of course, there's a whole lot more, and very similar to an employee manual. And again, this should be approved by your board of directors, and should be approved annually, updated and approved annually. What I've learned, though, is that, when you first put one of these together, it can be rather daunting, but once you have one, then it's pretty much just like an employee manual where you are updating it periodically, making appropriate modifications. Recruitment. Okay, now this is going to seem really simple. Why do people volunteer? But it's really important to rethink this every time you're approaching your volunteer recruitment strategies. Why people volunteer? And then you want to develop those recruitment strategies, and then you want to evaluate the strategies. Okay, so why do people volunteer? Well, these are some, I'm sure they're not all the reasons, but here are many of the ones that I've heard of before. Paying it forward. Somebody helped me out, or a family member or a friend, and I want to help the community out myself. A lot of people who've received help, volunteers, I'm sure most of you know this, volunteers usually volunteer at organizations that mean something to them in terms of they've experienced the problem themselves, or they have a family member or loved one who has experienced the problem, or is experiencing the problem, or a friend who's experienced the problem. So oftentimes it's paying it forward and making a difference there in the center. I think that hopefully that covers all the bases, right? But there are also a lot of people there to meet others. Now, when we say to meet others, you can say, well, socially, want to hang out outside of hours. But I think at the very least, people want to meet others and be part of something bigger than themselves, and part of a cause. And also, there are people who want to volunteer because they have the spare time. They might be retired. They might the children have moved out of the home. They're in between jobs, and so people who have spare time. Then there's those, and then many of you might be people looking for accreditation, but the people who need accreditation for school, want to put something on their resume, etc. Then we have, and by the way, we also, of course, volunteers are doing internships, whether they're working here. We'll have volunteers that are just administrative interns and need some hours for school, and then of course we have the psych interns like with UT, or they need like 40 hours for a class, and then of course we have the ones who need hundreds of hours, those interns as well. I already mentioned making a difference, covering all aspects, I think. There's religious and spiritual reasons. There's personal growth, being part of a team. I think that's part of to meet others, being part of a team. And then they're mandated. They're volunteers that are mandated. That's an interesting group of volunteers because, they can definitely do a good job, if like those who are mandated through the court system. But you really do want to look at the fit and make sure that it's going to be a good fit for whatever work they're doing, because they're going to be at your organization for a different reason. Oftentimes, I mean, there could be some of the other reasons that we've listed here. They're incorporated into that, but the primary reason that they're there is probably because they're mandated. And so that's just something to think about during that whole recruitment process and screening process. Again, people want to put the information on their resume, and especially people who are younger, who are in school. Volunteering. When I have hired people over the years, and of course, obviously because I've been involved with volunteers off and on throughout the years, but I see that someone has been volunteering, and they might not have a whole lot of experience just out of school, but wow, they've been volunteering and done all this work, and it's like, I can really appreciate that. And so I'm definitely going to consider that in the hiring process. Contributing to whatever the cause happens to be, and then recognition. I like to think volunteer wouldn't volunteer just for that, but I can see everybody likes to be recognized for something, and so we try to do that as much as possible, and I'll talk about that more in a minute as well. Okay, now we're going to switch gears here and talk about volunteer recruitment strategies. And here are some strategies, and you all, again, this is one of these things where I'm sure if you operate a volunteer program, you've utilized most, if not all, of these. But we're going to go over them, and I'm hopefully going to be able to give you some ideas that maybe, there might be some ideas that you haven't thought of or that you could use. And I also have some templates, again, if you want to ask for those when we're finished. We have, of course, there's the old traditional television, cable, and radio. Let's not count that out for sure, but still there's many, many people, and especially any population, but in the more mature population, it still relies heavily on those modes of media. Periodicals.
Can I interrupt for a minute?
Sure.
I have a question. It's me. Can this be, are they in periodicals and TV, cable, and social media, are they done for free? Like, they're donated because
Yes.
you're an NGO? Okay. That was
Absolutely. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you tips on how to get that done.
Okay.
When I was at the state, I'm sorry? Go ahead.
I said I jumped the gun here. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. You jump the gun as long as you want, as much as you want. That's fine. Any of y'all out there, that's fine. When I was at the national or the state runaway youth hotline, we would have semi-annual statewide media campaigns, and I learned that, and pretty quickly, because we had lost the national, all the other states to the national hotline up in Chicago, the runaway switchboard, and then we had Texas, and we lost like probably 60,000 calls a year. So we had to get those calls up, and through successful marketing, media, and public relations campaigns, we ended up increasing the calls, our hotline calls, by 300% in the first year, and would receive about $1 million each year of donated advertising from the corporate sector and private sector. So then that's another webinar I do that's different. But now talking about something like this, which is more of a local for a volunteer program, there are many ways. In fact, everything I've done here is for no cost. Okay. And of course, those templates I have are no cost either. I'll be happy to share. and again, and also no cost. You can also get with me afterwards if you ever have questions about media, using media with your agency or with volunteer recruitment, and I will be happy to provide no cost consultation if you need it. Okay, so back to periodicals. So we got periodicals, and of course those are newspapers, magazines, things that are put out periodically in print. Social media is so important right now, and getting more important as time goes on. I put down Volunteer Match as an example in Craigslist. These are definitely some key sites to get onto when you're promoting, and I'll get into that in a minute. Universities and colleges, local volunteer centers, of course, community events, of course, and hopefully your agency has a decent website where you can promote your volunteer recruitment there. Volunteer website. We have a website, and that has, it keeps going off and on because they're redoing it, and it keeps going back to an old one that we had. So if you check it out, hopefully you'll get this new one. And anyways, it's helpalliancedx.org, and it's what I'm showing you here is the volunteer page. And I put the application on here because I used to send the application out as a as well, first off, a long time ago, as just a PDF file, which they would have to print out and either scan and send back, or mail in or drop off. And then I started doing in Word, where you just fill in the form, and you could, it was electronic version, so they could fill in the form and just email it back to me. Well, now we're using an online form application. And y'all, I'm telling you, if you don't have this and you can do it, I really encourage you, because the day we put this up, I started receiving applications. I've been receiving applications on a daily basis, and it's only been up for about a week now, this volunteer application. But like today, I came in and I had 2 applications. So people really are responding to that. So I would definitely recommend, if you do have somebody who can handle your, who can change it on your webpage, if you don't have it, and if you have it, hopefully you're getting some good responses as well. Okay, and let's see what else I was going to mention about that. I believe that was that. What I'm working on right now is it's an animation. And we're going to try to use a volunteer to be the voiceover for it. This lady here, she's going to be the hopefully a volunteer, one of our volunteers, who's going to be on that website on the volunteer page, so somebody can click on it, and she's going to give some basic little mini orientation on the Hope Alliance volunteer program and how people can volunteer. So that's something that's in the works now, and I'm hoping to have it up. I would show it to you now if I had finished it, but I don't want to show you something that's unfinished. Here are some important sites that I'm going to bring up that if you aren't promoting your organization on it, definitely consider. Again, it's free, and they stay up for quite some time. Volunteermatch.org. This is one of the primary places I receive volunteers who are interested. They contact me through this website, and also our local volunteer center. And I'm sure in your community you have a local volunteer center, I hope. And definitely keep your information up on there. If you have, and you can either have a blanket volunteer description and title. I suggest that you break it down to different positions if possible. And again, you're selling here, so you want to put things in this, and I'll talk more about this as we go on. You're selling not only, you're selling your program, your services. You want to come across in the best light, and going back to why people volunteer. Why do they volunteer? Well, I started putting in a long time ago. Volunteers volunteer and receive a state of Texas sexual assault advocate certification. I put that in most of my in my descriptions, whether it's a PSA or posting like this, because a lot of people like the idea of getting a certification. It goes back to that accreditation piece, and not that that's the only reason. It could be, but it could be part of the reason why wow, that sounds really good. I want to get a certification. I can go through this 32-hour training class and on-the-job training and become certified. And then we have the volunteer center again, where I think that's just a no-brainer. Of course, your volunteer center, local volunteer center, you want to be involved with that. Attend any of their volunteer fairs. Meet if they have, like here in Winston County, we have a monthly networking meeting with organizations that run volunteer programs, and that's a great place to meet other people and get word out about what you're doing in your agency. And then there's the old Craigslist, and Craigslist, definitely don't discount that. It reminds me back before, I'm aging myself here, but we used to post in the newspaper in the classified ads before Craigslist was around, and and so you get the similar volunteers that you would get from those classified ads. You're getting them from Craigslist. You get some really great volunteers through Craigslist, but you also get some that may want to really kind of take a second look at, and but it's a good way to get the word out. You always want to, when you send out a Craigslist ad, you want to make sure, and really any PSA, that when they're calling and they're calling your organization to volunteer, that you make sure, like in a metropolitan area like Austin, and we're just north of Austin in Williamson County, just a few minutes away, but we could have somebody from Austin wanting to volunteer. After I talk with them, I could talk with them, and then finally realize, oh, wait a minute, they live in South Austin. Well, anybody who's familiar with Austin knows that driving from South Austin all the way up to Round Rock through Austin, hell traffic, why would one want to do that? And so what I do, early on is I check to see, and then I refer them to, say, Safe Place, or maybe the San Marcos women's shelter, domestic violence shelter there. And so again, like most of my PSAs or information I send out, I have basic information. You don't want to overwhelm people. You want to have a graphic that ties in with your other graphics, and obviously show how to contact you. And as you can see here, we have our map on the side. Obviously, that's not to our shelter, which is in a confidential location. That's to our administrative offices on County School Road. And then there's the TANO website. You can post there. We've got some listings there. And the TAASA website has a way that people can go in and they can put in their zip code, not only for services, but also for volunteering. And they put, it's not this page, but the previous page, it shows how to get involved. You can see the tab up there, how get involved, and then it leads you to this page right here, which can be helpful. Then you're going to want your materials, and if you've got somebody who's into graphics or even basic publisher, which is part of the Microsoft Office package, create something and some posters and some graphics that you can put out, and because you're definitely going to want to have graphics, which are so important when getting this information out. And y'all, I'm sure y'all have brochures. You can say, well, brochures, what do they mean anymore? You got the internet and all. Well, they're very important, I think. It's still an important piece of information to have. If you can print it in color and on glossy paper, that's great. If you can't, that's okay too. But like any other brochure or any other piece of information you're advertising, you don't want to put a lot of information on a brochure, too much information. Even I'm looking here, and I could use a little bit less here, but the point is that you want it to be eye-catching, you want it to be simple, showing a little information about your organization, what you do. I have a few stats here. I hate to overwhelm people with stats. Contact information, that's one side of it. And the other side, this has got the more information on it. Some information about opportunities. You see over on the left-hand side, I put volunteers receive. This is, I want to show them they're getting something out of this. You get flexible shifts, you get recognition, ongoing support, the certified training. Our mission, of course, is on there. A little, some bits about the volunteer opportunities. And then we have getting certified again, and how to volunteer, and the steps that are on there to volunteer. So, these are still, you still use them to go to fairs and to mail out to different organizations so that they have these in their waiting areas. Not these per se, but other brochures for the agency, with the agency services. But for the volunteer ones, they have the volunteer fairs and other fairs where people might be interested in volunteering. Okay, this is not what it looks like on the left.
Jay, can I ask a question?
Sure, go ahead. Yes.
Okay. Jay, do volunteers need ongoing education?
Yes, they do. We provide them with, offer them different trainings throughout the year, because like for the sexual assault certification that's administered, that's through, I should say, the Texas Office of the Attorney General. That's one of the requirements to maintain the certification. But that's not the only reason why we do it. It's just always good to update those skills. And so volunteers are invited to different in-services that we have.
Okay, and are the in-services done on evenings or weekends?
Those are done, yes, on evenings. during the day, on evenings, and then also on weekends. It just really depends on what's going on. Like, for example, if there's a staff training that's going on during the day,
Mm-hmm.
and that volunteers, it might be applicable for volunteers, we'll invite them if they're able to come in during the daytime. And then we also offer trainings in the evening time periodically. And in order to, because, well, as many of you know who have volunteer programs, most volunteers can come in the evenings, late afternoons, evenings, and on weekends, due to obviously working, going to school, and other obligations. So we try to accommodate them accordingly.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. So what you're seeing now is, this is what we give out, I should say. I give them out during the orientations. On the right-hand side, it's a magnet, and it's a refrigerator magnet that I hand out, so that the person that I'm doing the orientation with, or the people I'm doing the orientation with, can take this with them, and it has the dates and the times of the upcoming training as a reminder. On the left-hand side is a magnet. It's a locker magnet or refrigerator magnet, and it's really geared towards a younger volunteer, and it's and as by the way, it's one. These are templates I'd be happy to send you all. You could just put in your information on those templates. The cell phone template, it's magnet. You can put in, like, we use it also for our prevention program. So it says something like, have you heard about Project Empowerment, which is one of our prevention programs here, and then they're going back and forth. So that's just something you can use it for a variety of different things. And by the way, these are peel and stick. So you could print it out from a color printer, and then you just peel, stick, and then cut around the corners of that cell phone to make it into a cell phone.
Okay, Jay?
Yes.
Just the question, and some people wanting the templates, but one is, how many continuing education hours are required per year for the volunteers?
Oh, okay, sure. We ask for 6 hours.
6 hours per year?
Yes.
Okay. All right. And for the templates, they should just contact you?
Yes, they can just email me, and I'll be happy to email the templates back to them.
Okay, great. The Jay's information is at the end of the presentation.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Okay, and then of course you've got your email, and it's pretty much. I think this is important. If you're not already doing this, keep it simple. Don't put a lot of text in. Oftentimes I won't have that next training class dates on there because we don't have them scheduled. We have 3 training classes a year. We can only have 3 because it takes up a lot of staff's time and resources and all. So we try to get as many volunteers into those trainings as possible for obvious reasons. And the training classes are for those who are having direct client contact. People can volunteer without attending the training classes as long as they attend the 1-hour orientation. But the training, and it says it here with those bullets. So I use one small paragraph at the top. I use bullets for some basic information, plop in those training dates if I have them, and then just the bottom sentence on how to get a hold of us. And on this one, I've got, please complete the application, and I've got a link to the application that goes directly to that application that's on the website, or at least the volunteer page. I can't remember. Okay, so that is that. Oh, and it says, may I ask, I saw something there. Does somebody had a question about the sessions?
It says, may I ask why some of the training sessions are 3.5 hours and others are 6 hours?
Yeah, the reason is because the 6 hours are on Saturdays from 9 in the morning till 3 in the afternoon, and the other evenings from 6 at night till about 9 or 9 about 9:30, and so they're on. It's Thursdays, Saturdays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, Saturdays, etc. For about it's over a 2.5 week period, and we and when I started here, there were only 6 sessions, but the sessions on those Saturday sessions were from 8 in the morning till 4 and 4 in the afternoon. I sat through one of those, and I'm like going, you know what? By 2 in the afternoon, you're brain dead. Your attendees are brain dead, and no one's going to absorb anything. So why are we presenting this stuff? You know, even trying to keep it as interactive and active as possible. And so the first thing I did with the next one is cut down the times, and we added an extra day on, but it sure makes the time go a lot quicker during them. Okay, I hope that answers your question. Best message strategy for training classes. Best methods and strategies for conducting the training classes? Is that the question? Do you see that, Wendy?
Yes, I see that, and method for. I'm not sure if this is about curriculum. Ashley, is it about curriculum or to create a training schedule, like curriculum and flow, or is it about adult learning methods, or is it about, I'm a little confused here, but I tend to agree with Jay that people get brain dead pretty quickly, and to keep volunteers going regards the best way to creating the schedule. Okay, there you go.
Oh, the training schedule. Yeah. Okay, yeah. And that goes back to the idea. Well, what it is because we can only have 3 training classes a year. We realize that we can't accommodate everybody who wants to volunteer. So we have to go with the greatest number that we're going to be able to get in. And so the greatest number are going to be evenings and on weekends. So as far as the time of day and week, that's the reason we come up with that. We come up with the actual, the hours, like the number of hours they need, and that has a lot to do with our funding and our grants and et cetera, and also the fact that with what we're doing here, it's pretty common to have. I don't know. I'm not sure if this was your question. It may not have been, but 30. It really comes out to about 40 hours of training, which is about right for this type of organization. When I was at the state runaway and youth hotline, ours was about 40 hours. Other places do more, depending on what they're doing. I know victim services often they have a whole lot more hours. It really depends on the organization, but that's pretty much the standard as far as I know. And so again, I think that it's really because of the getting the greatest number of volunteers. I've had people say, "Oh, I can't do it. I can't make it to that volunteer because of my job or whatever." Well, you can still volunteer here, and when your schedule changes or something, then you can consider, coming to our training class, which always follows that same pattern, training schedule pattern. But you can still volunteer by attending the 1-hour orientation, and then I tell them giving some examples like representing the agency in community affairs, assisting in the main office and fundraising, etc.
Can I insert something in here, Jay?
Sure.
It's kind of like sometimes when I think about volunteering or getting everybody in to get the trainings that everybody needs on a yearly basis, especially the paid staff at the RCCs or shelters, it can be, especially in rural communities, if you have an outreach like y'all do, let's say in 40 miles down the road, let's say in Liberty Hill, or 40 miles the other way in Taylor, to get people to come in can be difficult at night because it's more driving than time spent in the classroom itself. So one of the things that the statewide coalition, that is TAASA, did was to sit down with the Attorney General's office where these trainings get approved and come out of, and say to them, you know, this becomes an issue because people can't always get there on time. And if we do webinars where you do the training and people can come in, if there's a basis to support that, if people can come into those webinars, which are active webinars, in other words, Jay would be presenting to in the classroom itself, and then there are 3 or 4 people attending from the outer reaches, that would count as their training as well. You're not sitting with a recorded webinar, you're sitting there while people are actively learning, sitting somewhere else. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, there are many ways you can work out the best ways to create a schedule and how to incorporate people. And when you have if there's a problem in the local shelters or RCCs, my recommendation is always to go to your coalition and tell them what you're seeking and let them see if they can, you know, advocate in your behalf, because that's what coalitions are supposed to do.
You know, and that's really great information. We're really looking into different avenues for training. I mean, when you're doing the volunteer training and you're going to have volunteers that are working directly with clients, you know, we're obviously mindful of the type of training that we're going to be doing. But I'll tell you one thing is that there's so many different ways, like you're saying, to reach out to those different areas. Like right now, I'm working on on online training for our board of directors. And so, in other words, using different, going outside of the box in terms of the modes of getting that information across. So, yeah, going to the coalition sounds like a great idea.
Right. And one more thing, Brittany, you said, is there a free program to utilize the webinar type scheduling? If you send me an email, that's WHILSENROD@TAASA.org. I'll put it in the chat box. I'll be happy to talk to you about that.
And keep in mind, y'all, going back to the about recruiting volunteers, you know, when I first wanted to volunteer, when I was in my early 20s, and I wanted to volunteer here in Austin, and I wanted to volunteer for Mothers Against Drunk Driving Mad, and I called them, and I never got a call back. Now, I'm not saying this to disparage Mothers Against Drunk Driving. They're a wonderful organization. That's not my point. My point is that at that time, and that was many years ago. So, but that I never got a call back, and I felt really bad. Wow, they don't want me.
Okay, Jay, I think we lost you. Are you still there? I can't hear you anymore. Jay?
Return messages, not only just general business messages and emails, but also any volunteers.
Jay, you're coming in and out. Jay, you might want to call in. Jay. Okay, can people hear me? Can you chat in? Tell me if you can hear me. I don't know what happened to Jay, but we lost him. So y'all can hear me, so we're missing Jay. Okay. Jay. I don't even know if he's still on or if he just totally got, because I don't see the screen moving. I'm sorry, everyone. Let me see if I can message him. Okay, I think Jay has left and is going to try to come back in, or he's going to try to call me. And if you hear the phone ring, that's Jay. I'm sorry, I'm thinking he was almost at the end of the webinar. Let's see what happens. We'll give him just a moment or two to come back in. Okay, does anybody have any questions that I can pass on to Jay if he should come back in? Because I saw where the screen said he left. And I know this is frustrating for all of us, including me. Okay. All righty. Okay, y'all. I don't know what to tell you. Okay, I am so sorry about this. I am going to try to get in touch with Jay, and I am going to try to see if we can at least give you a link to his, you can contact Jay at, let's see. Okay, Jay just asked what the number is, and it is, okay, let me send this off to him. Okay, Jay has arrived again. Jay, are you still with us? Jay, can you hear? Jay? Okay. Oh, thanks. Let me see if his is muted. Jay, dang it. I don't see Jay in the chat at all. Here we go. Jay. Jay, you're unmuted. Can you hear? Can you hear Jay? Jay?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I don't know what happened.
I don't know what happened either, but all of a sudden you were gone.
Oh, no.
Okay. Let me make you the presenter again, and let's bring it up. Yay, and welcome back. Okay.
Okay, and I'm going to show my screen here.
Okay.
You should be able to see it now, I hope.
Right. Great.
Okay, so let's see if we can finish this out without any glitches. Oh, good old, good
What
old.
it's all about, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's always about the glitches.
There, you know what? That's just, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, okay, so we'll talk about community events, and which I would assume if you have a program, you're attending those volunteer fairs, school informational fairs, churches, conferences, uh, business fairs at local businesses, and health fairs, and probably some other fairs that y'all are attending. You know what? I stopped attending many of these fairs a long time ago myself because we've got volunteers. I mean, we're talking about utilizing volunteers, and what a great way to recruit volunteers by having volunteers talk with them about their experiences. And they must be having some good experiences, or they wouldn't be out there at a volunteer fair recruiting people. And so that's really who we're using for ours. And then, you know, something to keep in mind again, you know, using volunteers for different things so that it takes the workload off of you and your staff. That's the whole one of the ideas of having volunteers. So that's just something I wanted to mention about that. Now we're still talking about recruiting and getting the word out, and this is an example of a press release. I don't know if you all have ever any of you have made a press release before. This is an example of what a press release or news release looks like. So you've got your contact information, you've got some real basic short information about your, like in the example here is about our upcoming training class, and there's contact information. In a news or press release, oftentimes you'll have where it says Hope Alliance, you'll have the words press release or news release. I just chose in this case just the Hope Alliance. And this is information that I email out to the local media in order to for them to hopefully run the information. And sometimes you get some places that'll run them a whole lot, and sometimes you don't. It's a crapshoot, but then that's the way a lot of things are. How do you get the best information on the stations, publications, etc., that you're going to be sending to? These are most of these are free. You can Google them. There's the Station Index Broadcasting Information Guide, and there is, and that's TV stations. There's, and I know you're maybe thinking to yourself, well, I know my local TV stations, so why do I need that? Because it has, it's there. It has information. These have information on who you're supposed to send the PSA to, and so you're not having to, try to look it up and maneuver their websites and try to figure out. And sometimes they won't have PSA. Oftentimes they won't send PSAs to this person. Sometimes it's just the editor, etc. So these places oftentimes will have that information. So there's Station Index, which is free. There's also, and that's TV stations. There's USNPL, which is our newspapers and TV stations, and that's these are national, by the way. And you might be thinking, well, I only serve my small area here, this small town. Will you be surprised how many stations are out there on radio locator, for example? And that's obviously for radio. Here's an example of their page that you can Google, and I put in Austin, and this is what comes up. This is just a piece of the number of stations. There's 50 more that you don't see here. Now, yes, there are ones that are showing up in Waco or maybe San Marcos or someplace that's miles out of the county. But there's a lot that are in the county or in the listening area that would be applicable to the audience that we're trying to reach. So, and what you can do is, what I do is I go in and then it's a table. So all you have to do is just delete the stations you don't think are going to fit your audience. So, if you're after just a younger audience, well, there's a lot of things you could sniff out, like news related possibly. I don't know. It depends on the age of the volunteer. Most of them I keep in because heck, it could be a relative who happens to mention it to somebody, word of mouth, friend. So it doesn't have to be the person, the potential volunteer themselves. And then there's on the bottom right-hand side here, you'll see the Texas Media Directory. Texas Media, I used to use that when I would do the statewide campaigns. It's a way to reach. It's got good information on the different newspapers and TV and radio stations, and it's actually a software where you just put in the information, and you can print out labels. So you can do mail outs and print out labels based on whatever stations you're interested in. And there may be some of you out there that do larger campaigns, and that's why I'm bringing this up. It does cost money, so I mean, I don't use it here, but if you do a larger one, or if eventually you end up doing larger outreach campaigns for volunteers or for whomever, that's a directory to consider. There's some prices here. I'm definitely not affiliated with them. I'm just giving you an idea of the cost. And so you can see in most cases it's not affordable. It's like a one for the whole state of Texas is almost $500 a year. But there are some that you can get locally. Austin area, it looks like it's $175 or $115. But anyways, just wanted to show you that, just FYI. Okay, now let's talk about the, I'm sure you have this if you're working with volunteers, keeping up your orientation list. You'll see there's the first and last name, all I get on my list here, email, phone number, and miscellaneous for my notes. I really don't even put phone number on here anymore because people are pretty much communicating by email. If I want their phone number, I go back to the application, because this is the list I'm making, or my contact information I keep on my pad, my memo pad I keep here up on my desk. This is what I use when I'm going to schedule my orientations, and I go through the list of the people that are interested, and I send a mass email out to casting that net out, hoping that, oh yeah, I'm interested in attending the orientation. Great, because I hold the orientations, group orientations once a month in the evening from 6 to 7 here at our main office, and that's that informational session. I'll talk to you more about that in a minute. Now let's go back to talking about screening. So screening is over the phone. Screening, again, is so important, is how somebody is over the phone. You can tell, as you probably know, if this is going to be a good candidate or not. I don't accept everybody who's interested in volunteering. I mean, most people can, obviously, but you never know, because there can be issues. We have the application, background checks, and references. And going back to the last screen, well, I'm not really going to go over much of this because this isn't another webinar. This is not the area that we're really focused on right now. But it does, the screening process, like I said before, does when it comes to the verbal and when you meet somebody, etc., and during the training classes and all, that's the screening process. Orientation and training. Okay, so we have the, I include these in the orientation schedules and contact you. I need to come up with that information. Orientation presentation, your training schedules and content, and your training presentation and evaluation. This is a folder that I have for the volunteer orientations. Now, I have the group one usually once a month. Right before the training, a few weeks before the training class, I'll have the evening offer them more than one time as we get closer, because I want as many people to come to that orientation as possible. Most of my orientations are held during the daytime. I tell people, if you're available during business hours, I'll be more than happy to meet with you. And so I will meet with them, and I one-on-one, and maybe there's a couple people that can come at the same time. So we meet in my office, and we have that orientation, which usually lasts with one person about half hour, maybe a little bit longer, and then I give them a tour of the office area to show them where they'll be volunteering, or at least they're working, even if they're going to be volunteering at the shelter, which I can't take them to at that point. They'll see what our office looks like. Because I don't know about you all, but if I'm about to work someplace, whether working or volunteering, I want to know where I'm going to be, what it looks like, etc. That's good information for them to know. So in here you see we have an organizational chart. It gives them that overview of the organization, real important. I have my PowerPoint printout, which I'm going to go over quickly in a minute. I've got a short volunteer opportunities list here, and then I have the policy manual, which I'm going to have them read over, answer the questions during the orientation, and let them sign. And then, of course, we have our volunteer program brochure and my business card, which is also in the Hope Alliance volunteer orientation packet. And I'll hand out that magnet at the same time towards the end of the meeting. Here's quickly, I'm going to go through this orientation. Basic orientation that has the mission statement, about the history of the organization, about our funding. This is where I throw in the part about us being non-sectarian, that we believe that religion and spirituality can play an important role in the lives of our clients, staff, volunteers, interns, etc. But we refrain from initiating religious discussions. If you work at a place that is a religious organization, that's a different story. We do definitely tell the volunteers that we will definitely can incorporate church, et cetera, into our clients when we're talking. When I use the hotline as an example, when you're talking about mobilizing resources and developing a plan of action with that caller, I'm definitely going to talk about their support systems in their community, and a church and a spiritual institution could definitely be one of them. So absolutely. Okay, then we have some stats, figures about who we've served here, our location, against overview. New people who've moved to town, they're not familiar with the county and the cities. The services that we provide, and then I go into detail about the different the emergency shelter, legal advocacy hotline, and how volunteers can help. I have this list I give out. This is for people interested in working at the shelter. Look, this is all the stuff they can do. So they can bring in whatever skills they have, and we've got different things: painting nails, cleaning, organizing a closet, organizing the food pantry. I mean, just a variety of things, specifically for adults, specifically for children's activities like storytelling, movie night, indoor-outdoor activities. I'm trying to get them pumped. I'm trying to get them to really get into this and to really want to, and fortunately, most of them do. We have these posters that we put out in the shelter. These are for volunteers these are just some generic ones that we make. You want your posters very simple. They're posters. They don't have a lot of information on them, but they convey the information about a volunteer who helps clients with jewelry, or does mom need a break? Well, most do, and when they're in the shelter, we'll watch their kids while they're in the shelter. The volunteers will watch their kids oftentimes. We've got a volunteer that makes origami with the residents. We have our board committee members. This is a good time to start scoping out your potential board members. We have subcommittee members that meet once a month. Oh, thank you, Melissa. We receive, we get volunteers who are ripe for board members. This is one of our recent classes. We've got, I believe in doing all this, we've got to have big classes because we only have them 3 times a year. And so, a lot of volunteers, we have one, retention's pretty good, but, volunteers, you get a chunk that stay around, but, there's volunteers that come and go, so you want to have big classes. And this was a big class, 44 hours of training total about, and we have classroom on the job training, I tell them, and self-study. What's next? I tell them what's next. This is what's next.
Okay. There's a couple of questions before we go forward. One was, could you go back 2 or 3 slides? Ashley, is that what you're asking for? The next one, the one above this. Okay. That's it. There was a question about how do you recruit and build volunteers for a call-in center or a chat room center, a call center, and also how many people show up to the monthly meetings for volunteers.
Oh, you mean like the orientations about, well, they used to be more because I would only have them in the evenings, and so right now I'll have in the evenings maybe anywhere from a few to maybe 5 because I'm having so many come in during the business hours to do the orientations.
Okay, and somebody wanted to know, how do you recruit and build volunteers for a call center or a chat room center? Which is the
same way as I can provide you with more information about it because that's what the hotline was that I recruited for back, when we had 100 volunteers answering phones at a call center. But I'll tell you, in a nutshell, a lot of it's what I've just shown you, which is, using those methods. But you're aiming your PSA is going to include, information about a call center and what's involved with that. So you're going to really focus on the call center piece as opposed to the more generic, even the different examples. I hope that helps.
I'm sure it does.
Okay,
Okay.
so we will move on here. I know we're about out of time, about 5 more minutes. The here's the just again, I'm not going to go over the training right now, but we have our training manual. Just an example of one page of the schedule that I give out that is included in the manual, so they know what's going on. And then, of course, you want your certificate of completion after they. I usually hold that off and give it all at one time because everybody finishes their on-the-job training. That way, I do it all one time, and it saves me. Volunteer survey. Again, retention is important to find out. Some people don't think surveys are that great. I actually think they're good because you might not get totally honest feedback. You know, volunteers are very nice people. They don't want to hurt people's feelings, most of them anyways. And so they having any information back from volunteers, and plus it's nice to hear good things about what you're doing. You know, I like that. I like to share it with the staff. Supervision and feedback is really important. Effective supervision, communication, performance appraisals are definitely important. Supervision, what's the management style that's preferred? You know, does somebody need micromanaging, want micromanaging? Do they not? Do you need to encourage people, or do you have volunteers go straight, oh yeah, I'm gonna go start working on something? You have different volunteers with different ways of approaching their work, and so that's something to keep in mind. And we want them to meet our expectations, and we want to meet theirs. Positive channels. We want to provide a positive environment. We always have our staff remind them, thank the volunteers when you see them in the hall. Ask them if they need anything. Communication is so important. Here's an example of my schedule for the shelter. It's de-identified. None of these people are real. But you'll see that what I do is I have this up on, my point is, everybody has a schedule, right? But I have this up on the Google Drive, so I can access this, and so can staff who are at the shelter anytime, 24 hours a day. I'm the only one that can modify it. You don't want other people modifying it, but I'm the only one who can modify it. So, and I'm the person they contacted if they can't make it in, so they'll text me or they'll email me. I see it on my phone. I let the shelter know, and I can go up and modify the schedule. So that's a way to keep that up to date. Regular performance appraisals, volunteer reassessment. Is this volunteer position needed? Is this a good fit? And you know what? They may not be getting working. They might not be getting a lot out of the shelter, but maybe they want to work at the at the hotline.
Okay.
Recognition. Yes.
Okay. There is another question. What are some suggestions for making sure call center volunteers feel needed during slow periods and/or while increased call volumes for your organization?
Yeah, when they're not, when it's slow, providing them, seeing if they want to be provided with administrative duties. It could be anything from folding letters and putting them in envelopes to doing something else based on their skills and their abilities. So that's one thing there to keep them busy. You know, it really depends on your organization, but I think bottom line that's what we do here anyways. Over at the shelter in the evenings and on weekends, they're doing other things over there too, so they also answer the hotline. That's just one of other things, but you're talking about a call center. And if the calls are really going, you said if it gets real busy, I guess there would be on the hotline calls if it's real busy. So are you talking about recognizing them? It's just really communication, if that's the question, because is talking about during slow periods. Yeah, so it's it's what I said before, and also going up and talking with them. This is so important to develop relationships. Some volunteers are loner types. They don't want to really get involved too much, and that's okay. But a lot of them at least want a basic conversation to know what's going on. Some want to be more involved and getting to know staff and all, and that's communication, very important. Through through correspondence regarding events, newsletters, recognition events. Of course, there's the old cards. You know, we print a lot of ours out from the computer, but you get the templates off of the internet. We have a hard copy here. We used to use this. This is one of our old hard copies, newsletters, And then we have our online. I use MailChimp to make the online newsletter for volunteers. This is just some examples of the pages. There's the prevention program. There's Sexual Assault Awareness Month. There's a video. We have spotlight volunteers, place to spotlight your volunteers. I always do more than one volunteer to try to get as many as possible without going overboard. And 2 or 3 seems to be about right. We had a gift drawing. So people during volunteer week. So volunteers, we had names drawn, and we had places that donated. I noticed, is it 10:30? Should we wrap it up, or do you want me to keep going? Wendy?
You can keep going for a bit. I also have a question. They say
Sure.
most of their volunteer staff of our 24-hour support line is done from their home. They like this so that they can be at home. However, after some times, it's hard to make them feel like they're part of the organization, and some volunteers leave. Any ideas?
Well, I'm not a real big fan of volunteers answering calls. I mean, if it's a necessity with the organization, then and you don't have staff that can do it, I like them coming to the office. I like them going to the shelter because of that very reason. It keeps them involved in what's going on. Volunteer, it's not like staff who work from home usually are full-time staff, and it's a full-time job. These are people that usually work shifts, and so if you don't need to have them working at home, I think their skills can be better developed if they're working with other people. But if your organization, which I think I may have seen a message that says that it has to be that way, then it goes back to the idea of that. It goes back to regular communication. So you would communicate them via email, via if it's instant messaging, and just don't leave them hanging out there, on their own, making phone calls, calling them after their shifts, inviting them to different events at the main office. Those are the ways I can think. Inclusion, that feeling of inclusion, that's the #1 way. Okay. Here's also in the newsletter, I'm highlighting volunteers that happen to be helping. These are some that weren't even the church and the Green Thumbs, that's the Girl Scouts, and the church is the Methodist Church, helped out at the shelter. This was a crossword puzzle, which had with whoever submitted it first to me, we got a $25 gift card from Amazon, and they had to, this is all based, most of it's based on the newsletter, so they had to read the newsletter. Of course, you want your events page. We had a volunteer that did Soul Cycle, raising money for, she did a great job raising money for our program. Dark Ball donated a bunch, 50 passes, and which we give out to the volunteers. Obviously, you want your event calendar and your birthdays and anniversaries. That's also important. We have a volunteer award ceremony, whether it's big or small. Always have one at least annually. It can be very low cost. If you can't afford a place like this place you see was Cafe Serrano's in Austin, they donated the space. We just had to pay for the food, buffet style, and then as you see, we have a board. We had a board on a. It was up, and the volunteers would come up and take their envelopes, their colored envelopes with patterns and all on them, and they could pick out which one they wanted. So the volunteers that had the most hours for the year would come up and be the first ones to pick from the board. And we had quite a few besides what was on here. So that was and these places donated to us. We didn't pay for them. The governor's office, they have their Yellow Rose Award. You see the lady on the bottom right-hand side holding. That's a free award. You send in something to the governor's office, and they'll send you not the plaque, but the award, the certificate signed by the governor. And that's just something to offer as well. And we have what you see on the bottom left-hand side, we have paper ones that go into certificate folders for volunteers with so many hours, but volunteers who've been here for a long period of time, I think it was a year or more, got a plaque. And the plaques are about $5 a piece, and you can order them in bulk. Okay, retention, why volunteers leave, why they stay. Pretty simple. External personal reasons, because someone died, they're moving, whatever, and then reasons because it's just not fulfilling. You didn't meet those expectations we talked about. it didn't, they didn't feel like they were part of something. They didn't feel like they were really making a difference. And this is why it's so important to keep this in mind through the whole process. I can't tell you how many people will say, I've heard, will say stuff like, and I've heard it myself, how many aunts, it's like you used to hear in school, like, if people call in sick or at business work or whatever, how many aunts and grandparents passed away, or you know what I'm saying? And it's like, I think a lot of volunteers are so nice, they just don't want to say that they don't want to volunteer anymore. And they just go, either that or they just disappear. So it's important for us to really be aware, and communication is number one. And then you'll have these are some volunteers with, some of them are ours and others were from the community with United Way, and they were helping out over at the shelter. You get happy volunteers, awesome volunteers. Here's my contact information, y'all. I'm sorry to go over. I'm sorry about the little glitch. I don't know what happened. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Contact me if you want any more information and any templates that I can give you. I won't be able to get everything to you, but most of it. And I'm so glad that you were here. Thank you very much. Thank you, Wendy. Bye.
Thanks, Jay. I'll be with you in a second. I'm going to make me the presenter right now, and I'm going to put up the post test. I hope y'all will take it. It will also come in in about an hour. And let's see. Here's the post test, and you should be seeing that. Okay. It was a wonderful presentation. Launch. Okay. So I appreciate y'all being here today. Thank you so much. Again, contact Jay, contact me, contact webinars at TAASA.org, and we will get you anything and everything, well, I shouldn't say that you need around volunteer training. Have a good day, y'all.